Hello, welcome to the conversation here on News Central Television. This program where we bring you all the latest political happenings on the African continent. I am Gbenga Aborowa. Today on the conversation, we will analyze the deputy presidential candidates face-off that took place in Nairobi, Kenya just yesterday. Also, we will be discussing the most recent update on the UK-Rwanda asylum deal, as previously unseen internal documents from the United Kingdom's Home Office relating to the controversial asylum deal with Rwanda's government have come to light. But first, let's look at the deputy presidential candidates face-off in Kenya. The deputy presidential candidates Rigathi and Martha Karua differed sharply yesterday, with the issues of integrity coming at the center of the debate. Karua, a former justice minister, described herself as an honest and hard-working Kenyan who is not hungry for earthly wealth and does not believe in the primitive accumulation of wealth. According to her, she is worth 150 million shillings. It was a clash of contrasting personalities as Miss Karua squared up against Mr. Rigathi, whose $200 million shillings asset was frozen by the court over suspicion of being proceeds of graft. But Rigathi maintained he too was clean. The Mathira MP, whose Deputy President William Ruto's running mate, instead blamed his woes on the incumbent President Uhuru Kenyatta. Rigathi said he is a victim of Uhuru's wrath to whip everybody to support his political project. The two spoke during a live presidential debate at the Catholic University of Eastern Africa in the capital, Nairobi. The Kenyan presidential elections are slated for the 9th of August 2022. Now, joining me live on the conversation today, we have Nerima Wako Ojiwa. She is a political analyst based in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. I also have Declan Galvin, head of Insight Information and Intelligence, WS Insight, joining us live from Nairobi, Kenya. A warm welcome to you both, and thanks for joining us on the conversation.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Now, Nerima, I did see you on national TV yesterday in Kenya. You were part of those that were analyzing this debate, and you had a front row seat to the happenings yesterday, the deputy presidential candidates debate. How would you rate the performance of the leading deputy presidential candidates, Martha Karua and Rigathi Gachagua?
Well, first of all, it's a major thing for us to have in our country, to have a national debate on all the channels. And so big props to media. But I believe that we were expecting a lot more in terms of their manifestos. A huge chunk of the debate was on integrity and corruption, which a lot of Kenyan feels was important. So personally, I don't feel that the debate was weighty enough. But I do think that they did perform very differently. Strategies were very different. So I wouldn't say that it was above par. I would say it was midway for both of them, as much as people had, I believe, low expectations for Rigathi because they didn't have him, speaking publicly. They had a different impression of him, but they expected a lot more from Honorable Martha Karua because of her background as a lawyer, a senior counsel, and Minister of Justice. So they had very high expectations for her. So for me, I would rate it at maybe a 7, but that's even giving it very high. But I think it was okay.
Now, Nerima, would you say it's as a result of the questioning that came from the moderators? Because at the end of the day, if you look at all the newspapers in Kenya, it was, okay, I'm worth X amount of shillings, I'm not corrupt, this and that. Was it a fault of the type of questions that were thrown at the candidates?
I think the type of questions were okay. I think it was the steering of the conversation. There were plenty of opportunities to steer the conversation toward the right direction. I think some points we lost track, and it was a lot of jabs. And so you could see that it was about trying to maybe change a narrative of your opponent, or there were some jabs that were humiliating, frankly speaking, although it was subliminal. So you can just judge that on how a lot of things were articulated. But I think that the moderators could have had a firmer stance, not just on time. The time was managed very well, but there was also one point that Honorable Rigathi removed a paper, read from it, he was reading from his phone. Yeah. Those are not the rules of debate. And so moderators could have done something about that. And even sometimes, sharing allegations, or there are allegations against him that have been on front papers, in the front page of newspapers, that could have been highlighted for him to explain more in depth, but he wasn't challenged that much, and he kept escaping toward blackmail.
Thank you, Nerima. I'd like to bring in Declan. Now, Declan, the Kenyan elections is one of the biggest, most sought after elections when it comes to politics on the continent, and we saw the vice presidential debate yesterday. Nerima said it didn't quite live up to the fireworks that were expected. But what were the highlights of the debate for you, from your point of view?
So I think I'll look at both the kind of what we're calling tier one and then the tier two debates. Nerima is very right that there were certainly jabs and insults which were stated. But overall, if we look at the conduct of both tiers, we've certainly seen debates in the United States and elsewhere in the world where people were far more rude and less constructive. So I think if we look at the totality of these debates, tier one and tier two, there were some interesting things that got to be discussed, particularly on these kind of tier two debates. The second thing I'll mention is Rigathi Gachagua did a very tactful job in making this as much about his talking points as possible. And I feel like that was well rehearsed from that side. And they were fairly critical of the sitting president, Uhuru Kenyatta, which was clearly part of their strategy.
Thank you, Declan. Now, following reactions, Twitter, Kenyans on Twitter are very vibrant, and we saw the debates were trending all over social media yesterday. Nerima, Kenya Kwanza Alliance supporters took to Twitter and mocked their Azimio la Umoja One Kenyan Coalition Party counterpart, who had anticipated underperformance from Deputy President William Ruto's 2022 presidential running mate, that's Mr. Gachagua. Is there any chance that Martha Karua underestimated Gachagua's abilities? I know in your opening statement you did say you expected her to do better as a senior counsel and a lawyer and someone that was justice minister, more experienced in the political field.
Yeah, so it's not that I expected her to do better. I just think that it's the Kenyan people put high expectations on her. And this is the first election where we have, out of the 4, 3 of the deputies are women. We have never in our experience or historic, elections had women, majority women in that position. So I think that it being the first time that happened, there was a lot that people were expecting Honorable Karua to behave in a certain way. She's known for being very straightforward. She cuts straight to the point. And so people were expecting that of her. So you could see very well in Honorable Rigathi's opening remarks, he went straight to family and, trying to measure, what is family and how he's a family man. And there was this statement that there was an undertone of patriarchy, to be honest, where he talks about, the man being the head of the household. So he went directly for it from his opening comments. And so I think it's not that she underestimated him. She expected him to behave that way. I believe so. But I think it's a bit contradictory because Kenya Kwanza, their manifesto, they do promise to have 50% of cabinet to go toward women. And they are the only ones who promise to have a women rights agency. So you would think that they would be more open toward women's leadership, but that didn't necessarily come out loudly.
It's a bit of a contradiction then. Thank you, Nerima. Now, Declan, talking about jabs and insults, and I'm happy you did give kudos to the Kenyans, because we've seen debates, especially in America, where jabs and insults, and it does really get ugly sometimes. But at one point at yesterday's debate, Gachagua accused Martha Karua of being a weak leader. for resigning during a stint as a minister in late President Mwai Kibaki's government. She did respond that her resignation was based on principles. It was the principled thing to do. What do you make of this? Was this really an insult? And what do you make of all of it?
So I'll start with a broader observation. For those who were studying and watching the Nairobi gubernatorial debates, the UDA, in this case, it was Johnson Sakaja, made the same kind of allegation against Polycarp Rigathi for resigning as the deputy governor of Nairobi several years ago. So I think that there was, again, to just kind of identify, there's clearly a strategy on the UDA side to disparage and to question the leadership records of their main contenders and people who've been in government, particularly those people who exited government. Now, that being said, I think that if we look at Martha Karua's response to that, I think that was really well crafted, and certainly it would be consistent with what she said at the time. I think by and large, the public would recognize this. I've said on this station before, Martha Karua is a respected leader. She is highly distinguished, and those are facts. You can disagree with her, you cannot support her, but her track record is recognized, and I think that she was able to uphold that with that specific line of questioning.
Thank you very much, Declan. Now, talking about Martha Karua, Azimiola Umoja supporters commended the performance of Martha Karua, saying she was speaking from understanding compared to her competitor, whom they said had notes to refer to. In the beginning of the debate, were there any set out rules that, you can't refer to your notes? And does it give your opponent an extra advantage if you're referring to notes? Because sometimes you need cue cards so you can remember some of the points you want to make, and you don't want to give quotes that might be wrong. So what do you make of the whole, is it a form of cheating if you have notes? Nerima?
Yes, yes, it is. In these debates, you're not supposed to have notes.
So the rules were set out that you shouldn't have notes?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
We're clear on that.
And you're not supposed to even have your phone with that. You're not supposed to have your phone.
And did that give Gachagua an advantage?
Yes, it did, because he was asked a question on state capture, and he pretty much pulled out a paper and he read it word for word. You might say that he didn't want to misquote, but also it shows, is it that you're knowledgeable, or are you very afraid to make a mistake? So you want to make sure you're tactical, because this is about pressure. You have 1.5 hours to speak to the Kenyan public. So eye contact is of importance, and also showing that you're able to articulate issues and you have all this in your mind. So yes, actually the moderators should have said something about that, but they didn't. He shouldn't have had those notes in front of him.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. Now, Declan, looking at debates in general and politics in Africa, there's still a huge percentage of the population that are illiterate, and I'm sure not all of them got to watch this debate. Do debates have an impact on the electorate today? What's the electoral value of it, or are they just an academic exercise?
So I'll bracket your question, and sorry if I dodge it a bit. Regardless if they have an enormous or significant impact on elections, what I think they speak to is the importance of transparency and process in democracy. And having these kinds of conversations between people, having it in front of the media, allowing the public to directly ask questions, granted those are filtered, those things are really important democratic practices. And so I think that's what matters more than anything else. And so I think the Kenyan Media Council has done an amazing job. I think that the candidates for subjecting themselves to this public treatment is a progressive attitude, regardless of where we land in terms of agreeing or disagreeing with their platforms.
Thank you, Declan. I'd like to throw the same question to Nerima. And also, are we expecting a presidential debate?
Yes, we're expecting a presidential debate. And so now all eyes will be on the presidential debate just to see whether they're going to be able to continue in terms of how their deputies performed, looking at all four. Although I know that there are two tiers. So Wajakoya, who would fall under the first interview, has already mentioned that he wouldn't come to the presidential debate unless all four of them are on the same platform together. So we will see if
and what do you make of it? Why do we have tiers? Because I mean,
they were,
yes.
Yeah, it's been a little bit controversial. There are people who don't really agree with that framework, but then they're doing it because they're checking on the percentages in terms of popularity. So they say that, if those who have a very high popularity stay on the same ranking, so they've looked at a certain percentage, and those who fall under that percentage now debate within that ranking. So
the leading candidates agreed to attend, talking about Deputy President William Ruto and Raila Odinga. Have they confirmed their attendance?
Yes, they have. Yes, they have. It's just Wajakoya who basically said that if they're not all four on the same platform, he wouldn't come. So we will see if he'll stay true to his word or still come and end up being on the panel or on the podium with Maure, who's the fourth. So we'll see when it comes to that.
Okay, thank you, Nerima. Now, Declan, the deputy presidential debate that we saw last night was quite heated and was characterized by rebuttals between the candidates. For instance, Gachagua vehemently dismissed the claims that he had amassed over 12 billion Kenyan shillings, money thought to be proceeds of corruption. The outspoken Mathira MP said the money frozen by the government is only 200 million Kenyan shillings and cumulatively is worth about 800 million Kenyan shillings. Why is the financial worth of a candidate such a big deal in these elections? It seems like the poorer you are, the more appealing you are to the people. And I mean, Gachagua, the irony of it, it says he's from the hustlers camp of things. So what do you make of money politics?
So I think there's a couple things going on. The first is the public wants to understand how much unexplainable wealth these leaders have, and so there's a desire to kind of understate your value. Yes. The second point is that it's almost like politics anywhere. I don't think that it's much different than certainly Nigeria and the United States, where politicians want to be relatable. They know that they are almost always in a completely different socioeconomic class than voters, and they want to show that they can kind of connect. In the United States, we say
they do that once in 4 years. In Nigeria, you see politicians eating street food, doing things they never did in the last 4 years. Some even go as far as braiding women's hair in salons. So I guess it's political season in Africa. That's what happens. Yeah, go ahead with your thoughts, Declan.
And so Nigeria is probably an extreme case in terms of most of this conduct. But look, and sorry to go off notes just a little bit, but I think if we were to compare Nigerian and Kenyan politics, Kenyans do seem to be one degree separated from their political leaders, and there's much more of an interaction in a day-to-day basis. Now, that doesn't mean that they're brushing shoulders and enjoying one another's company, but there is kind of a lot more visibility on these activities, rather than people living on a completely different planet. And so that's a very fascinating, intimate look at Kenyan politics. But I think, look, when we have campaigning and people want votes from the wananchi or the public, they want to appear to be kind of relatable. Cool and that's how they do it.
Thank you, Declan. Now, Nerima, still following money and talking about money, and it's the first part was the worth of this leading deputy presidential candidates. Now, politics in Kenya, as seen in lots of parts of Africa, is heavily reliant on financial muscle and handouts, a lot of personality politics, without much conversations on the issues and manifesto of the political parties. Has that changed in this electioneering season? And what needs to be done to change this and elect leaders based on their credentials?
Well, we do have a campaign financing act, but it's been shelved. And it's something that we keep bringing up every time we have elections in terms of controlling the amount of money that's used during campaigns, or at least allowing people to see, or the public to understand, where individuals are getting those resources from. So also the reason why we're constantly asking about people's wealth is because we've had previous presidents try to do lifestyle audits, beginning with President Kibaki, just as a way to sort of take care of corruption, because a lot of public officials and public servants, enter government and end up using a lot of their resources for personal gain, and then utilizing those resources for campaign. So this is one of the elections where a lot of state resources has been used on both sides, and it's a concern. So I think going forward, we're going to actually have to find a solution toward how much people can utilize in a campaign, and also being able to monitor and seeing whether people are being truthful when they open up and try to be transparent about how much they're worth. And for those who are not transparent, having stricter regulations in terms of them being able to stand in an elective seat. Because there was a group of organizations that came together and basically shared a list of almost up to 40 people that they feel shouldn't be given, tickets or the green light to stand. And out of that list of 40, only 4 were told that, you're not going to be able to stand. But even those 4 have petitioned in court, and majority of them, about 3, have been permitted. Only 1 is going back and forth with the courts, where he sort of got the green light, and then now he's been pushed into the Supreme Court. And because we're running out of time, he might not be able to be on the ballot. So it shows you that if we're to move toward values or utilizing resources much more, it has to be an effort where the executive is being very intentional about it in terms of accountability, and allowing the institutions that are supposed to follow up with these resources to be able to function. A lot of them are underfunded, and they're not necessarily independent, so they struggle to exist. And that's the only way we're going to be able to manage our elections and how much we spend in our elections.
Thank you, Nerima. Now, Declan, just before we begin to wrap things up, general elections in Kenya have experienced violence in the past that has killed many people. As we inch towards this year's general elections, slated for the 9th of August. What's the general feeling on the ground in Kenya? And are the 2022 elections likely to pass without violent incidents? I know you don't have a crystal ball in front of you, but from your point of view.
So, look, really good question. And I think the first thing to say is there will almost certainly be violence associated with this election. However, that does not mean that the election is going to be widespread, that the violence will be widespread. It doesn't mean that it will shape the outcome or have something like 2007, that kind of scenario. If we look at the overall environment and people's attitudes, kind of whether that's from kind of everyday kind of residents and voters to people from the foreign business community, there's a lot of really positive indicators going into the election, and I think that's an important part of the story to tell, so that we can begin to step away from this narrative that everybody holds, and it doesn't matter where you are, kind of on the spectrum, that Kenyans are violent during elections. We need to begin to step away from that narrative. There's a lot of really positive indicators as we move into this. A lot of room for optimism, but we also need to be practical. We know that there's going to be problems, and Kenya is not the only country in the world where we have post-election violence. The United States had its own version of post-election violence. So we should be sober about it, but I think there's a lot of reasons to be positive.
Thank you, Declan. Now, my final question will be directed towards Nerima. I also want to get your take and your feelings about violent incidents, the possibility of it breaking out in the elections, and also what is your assessment of the conduct of the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission? Are they ready for this elections? And do you see an improvement from the last time Kenyans went out to vote?
I do see an improvement, this change, because I feel that they're a lot more transparent in terms of what they're planning to do. Being able to have a press conference with all the media houses and being open to being questioned by journalists for over an hour and a half, and saying that they're going to be having more of these press conferences in the lead up to the election. And number two, having a simulation. And even though the simulation, the first one that they did not go well, I do know that they had a simulation today, and I believe that it was successful. I will be seeing it on the media soon, since right now it's news time. So the fact that they were willing to say, okay, so the first time we didn't do so well, but here are the changes that we've made. We're doing a simulation that's open to the public, see how we've improved, and we want this election to be transparent. Three, there have been a lot of changes in terms of sharing of information, partnering with the media a lot more at the polling stations, partnering with the police. Each polling station would have 2 police officers. So there's definitely a flow of communication, and then permitting parallel tallying. That has never happened before, where they're saying if parties, if organizations want to witness the counting as well, they're allowed to, and let's compare results and let's see, hopefully, that they will be close to each other. So I think that's very different in this election that hasn't happened in previous elections as well.
And it
So
allows for a
overall,
level
I
of
think that's
transparency too, if I may ask. Yes, if I may add, yeah.
I didn't hear you, Gbenga.
I said it does allow for a degree of transparency when you have parallel tallying and party agents can witness.
Absolutely. It just has to be managed well, because now what happens is, you talked about earlier, this time around, there's a rise in sharing information online on social media again. A lot of misinformation is on TikTok, and this is now a different platform that wasn't there in 2017 in the previous election. And so, they've also tried to partner with TikTok itself in monitoring. So hopefully all the preparations will fall into place, and, all the different stakeholders have been involved, and hopefully that it will reduce tension once people are able to see what's happening. But this information has to be disseminated right. IEBC is the only institution that's allowed to declare the results, nobody else. And so hopefully that system will work.
Thank you very much, Nerima, Ojiwa and Declan Galvin, for being our guests today on The Conversation. We do appreciate your insights on the subject, and we hope to have you back following the presidential debate. Thank you very much, and do have a lovely evening.
Thank you.
You're watching The Conversation here on News Central Television. We just concluded our conversation on the deputy presidential candidates debate that happened in Nairobi, Kenya last night. We'll go on a quick break, and when we come back, we'll be switching gears to the UK and Rwanda asylum deal. The United Kingdom ambassador to Rwanda apparently advised his government against the Rwanda agreement. We'll be looking at details of this and more when we return. To stay with us.